So I would say that so if the demand for housing increases, so let's say demand shifts to the right, that would increase the price, right, for houses. So the producer surplus would increase. Um, and I would use a diagram to illustrate that. And then I'd probably look in this extract and see what I could find. The index price of houses, so I could say um, between 2009 and 2008, you could see that the house prices have increased by what would that be? I don't know off the top of my head. I'm just gonna blank and say 75%. It will be less than that anyway. And then that would be my application towards that. Right. So yeah, the because we didn't get any questions in the Google form, what would people like to discuss?
Could you go
So,
through producer and consumer surplus on like tax diagrams and like subsidy diagrams?
hmm um, yeah. So I'll just get something from everyone. So yeah. Marissa, anything that you want to go through, or
Um, I was gonna say to go over how to answer like 25 markers and stuff like that, like how to approach them basically.
mm-hmm. Lisa?
Um, can you come back to me? I'll think
Yeah,
of
that's
something.
fine. Yeah, no worries. Okay. So so what's our definition of consumer and producer surplus?
Consumer surplus is the difference in what consumers are willing and able to buy and what they actually pay for the product.
Yeah, and basically the same when it comes to producers. Yeah, happy with that. So, for example, like how much would you be willing to pay for a Dairy Milk chocolate bar, like one of the big ones?
Like £2.
£2, right? And typically you find that they're like £1 25. Yeah. So if we take those from each other, the 75 pence, that would be your consumer surplus. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I realized I'm not. There we go. Think. Yeah, there we go. Should be following me now. So that's consumer surplus. So um, if we have a subsidy, that's obviously gonna because if you learn one of them, it's the opposite for the other, right? So let's say the demand stays the same, subsidy will shift to the right. So at the start, the price was Q and the quantity was, sorry, the price was P and the quantity was Q, right? So our consumer surplus would be this green shaded region. Yeah. So this is our consumer surplus. And our producer surplus is the section below. So this is going to be our producer surplus. Yeah. So it's easy to remember. If the price decreases, so like how we have here, we've had a subsidy. So the price now is going to be, I'll do it in blue. So this is our new price P1. So what's happened to consumer surplus?
It's increased.
Yeah, it's increased, and it's increased by this region here. Yeah. And producer surplus is decreased, right? And the reason for that is our consumers, you generate more of a surplus the lower the price goes. Yeah. Because remember, like you said, you're willing to pay £2. So if the price drops to £1, your consumer surplus is £1. So it's you've gained the surplus. Yeah. Your your satisfaction has increased because now you're paying even less than you're willing to pay. You feel better about yourself. Whereas the producers, they want to maximize profits, right? So if the price decreases, the producer surplus falls because they're getting less per good. Yeah. Um, Actually, what I've realized, it's going to be all the way over here. Actually, that will be a consumer surplus. Yeah, and we'll just quickly go through the tax. So with the tax, oops, we'd expect with a tax supply shifts to the right, left, sorry. So we started off over here. We have P and Q. And again, the green shaded region will be our consumer surplus, and the red shaded region will be our produced surplus. Yeah. But this time, what we can see is the price has increased. Yeah. So automatically, the consumer surplus is decreased. Yeah. But in this one, so has the producer surplus. And that's because though they're charging a higher price, though they're charging a high price, they're actually so though they're charging a high price, you can see that this shaded region that they would have um is much smaller because they're selling less goods. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Can you just explain that bit one more time?
So the consumers, their consumer surplus is decreased. So it's now just this green triangle because they're paying a higher price. But our producers, though their produced surplus is decreased, well, the produced surplus, quote unquote, has increased because they're getting a higher price. But if you look at the shaded regions, it's smaller, and that's because they're selling less of the good. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But in terms of the size, or what happens to produce a surplus, meaning it depends on the size of the shift. So if supply shifts by more, then more than likely produce surplus will fall, if that makes sense. So so I'll make sure to write something up after, and then you can have that to hand as well. So next one was Marissa, you said you wanted to how to approach 25 markers. So have you had the chance to go on the platform and go through the 25 mark like exam technique? book thing?
I've tried to, but I feel like I learn better when someone's explaining it to me because when I read
Yeah,
it, I've
that's
forgotten.
fine. So, so the way I always approach 25 markers is that um is it needs to be a balanced argument. So you need to have a good pro or con approach. So to the statement that's been given. Um, and you need to, in order to get your top marks, you need to have you need to have a good amount of evidence and um, like your chains of analysis needs to flow. So if I just, so what I'll do is I'll show you what's on the platform and then I'll explain it as we go. So ideally in your introduction, you want to like use definitions of key things that you're going to talk about. So if you're going to talk about monetary policy, tell me what that is. If you're going to talk about fiscal policy, tell me what that is. If you're going to talk about supply side policies, tell me what that is. If you're going to talk about inflation, tell me what that is, right? You want to define all your key definitions at the start, and then you want to start kind of like you want to answer the question in the sense of you want to tell the examiner how this essay is going to flow. So you're going to say something like, "This essay will go through." So let's say the one I'm going to show you is one about smoking. So let's say this essay is going to explain how the different policy, the different policies available to the government that they can use in order to decrease the number of people who are smoking. Um, this essay will highlight the use of taxation, regulation, and provision of information, and how they can positively and potentially not even be effective sources to or measures to reduce smoking. Yeah. Are we happy with that so far? Uh, so then you want to, if you can, you want to draw diagrams. Um, so include like two diagrams, one that's going to support your answer, one that's going to be against it. Yeah, you want it to be fully labeled and you want to use spec when you talk about your diagram. So spec is you need to talk about the shift, you need to talk about the price, you need to talk about the equilibrium, and you need to talk about the quantity. Yeah. If you want to, just draw your diagrams straight after your introduction and just put diagram one, diagram two. Up to you. Or if you want to draw them with your analysis, then do whatever. So your first point, your first paragraph, actually some other good points it says here actually. With your great evaluation with your diagrams can always be about the elasticity, the slopes of the curves, and so on. Those are all like really good piece of evaluation that you can talk about. So you can say like, for example, if the demand was inelastically sloped, you would find that the quantity wouldn't change by much, and the price, even if the price increased by a lot. Yeah. So our first paragraph, we're gonna make a point. So one sentence that's an argument, right? Then we're gonna explain our argument, provide some evidence, either from the extract or that you already know. Then your analysis is gonna break down the theory of what your point is. Yeah. So we're gonna talk about A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and so on. Yeah. Then after that, you're gonna have evaluation with examples. Yeah. So you're going to say, let's say, for example, I've talked about um, uh, I've talked about a negative consumption externality and how we're fixing it using a tax, right? Then my evaluation might be, however, taxes create black markets. For example, during the 2010s, there was an epidemic of illegal cigarettes, sorry, counterfeit cigarettes being sold, which had detrimental impacts on people's health, as people who were consuming these cigarettes were being negatively affected and even dying from them, because these cigarettes weren't regulated. So that's an example of something that did happen. I haven't given you like numbers because I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but that's what actually happened. So that's still evidence, even though it's not like I'm telling you it's X percent, whatever. And then a link sentence to answer the question and provide a bit of judgment. So do you agree with the point being made? So I might say, um, I do believe that let's say use of taxation um on smoking is effective because it can lead to it can because it's going to deter some people because it increases the price, and because of the taxation revenue, that revenue that's generated can be hypothecated to fix the externalities that are being generated from it. Yeah. So that money can be spent to fix the 2.4 billion that's spent every year by the NHS on smoking related diseases. Yeah. Happy with that so far? Then we just do that again for paragraph number 2. So we do that again for paragraph number 2. I've realized that. There we go. We do that for paragraph number 2. Same thing again. And then your conclusion. Your conclusion will just be you answering the question explicitly, right? Do you agree with the statement? Or do you think there should be a different approach? So what I always say to students is any externality questions is your paragraph should basically be different ways you can fix that externality. Yeah. So with smoking, you need to talk about cigarettes, provision of information, and regulation. Yeah. You do 3 paragraphs on each one, and then in your conclusion, you're going to say basically the best way to solve this externality is using all 3 of them together. Yeah. Because that's what the government has done in real life when it comes to smoking. And I've literally just closed it as well, haven't I? I have. I'll show you some like micro.
Sorry, could you repeat the 3 points for the externality question, please?
So the externality question, you want to utilize different um different policies or different interventions to fix the externality, because each externality has its flaw, right? If we use a tax, it can be regressive, obviously, but we want to stop people anyway. But the issue with having a tax is that some people still might pay for cigarettes because they don't know about alternative ways to stop smoking. Yeah. The government doesn't have enough information about how to set the tax, because they might set the tax too high or too low. So, and also some people might switch to vaping, which can be equally as bad. Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to tax not only cigarettes but vapes as well. Yeah. Then and something else that we need to do, maybe provide information. Yeah. Provide information about why smoking is bad. So you get all these adverts, you see billboards, you see TV adverts with why smoking is bad. On the packaging, it tells you why smoking is bad, right? Because that can cognitively change people's ideas. But we have the issue of that, well, there's alternative behaviors, right? Smoking is habitual. Yeah. It's also a social norm. Some people might see it as, oh, my granddad smokes and he's still 90, so I'll be fine. Yeah. So you need to break some of the cycles. So what I might do, add in regulation. So now you have to be over 18 to buy cigarettes. They've added in a new regulation, which I forgot the date that it starts. So it's like, I think if you're born after 2012 or something, you'll never be able to buy a cigarette. And that's because every year the cigarette, like the minimum age to buy a cigarette will just keep going up. So you're just always going to be falling short. And that's to basically try and incentivize a generation who can never be able to buy a cigarette, so will never think of smoking. So that's getting rid of that social norm. So you can see how all three policies target different issues and together will help us fix smoking, quote unquote. Yeah, does that make sense? So with any externality, I always say you want to utilize, you want to talk about different policies because your conclusion is easy. You're just saying, well, it depends upon, well, one, information and how you utilize all of the policies together. Yeah. If you do them individually, they're not going to be effective. If you do them together and have a strategy, then it's going to be more effective. So if you're generating taxation revenue and using that taxation revenue to fund your information campaigns, but also to fund alternative ways to stop. So I've given like free Nicorettes at your GP, that's going to help stop people smoking. Does that make sense?
So is it basically just correcting market failure?
So you want to correct market failure in a variety of ways. Because one of your biggest issues, so even though it's such a small topic, it's a small topic, but it's really important. It's about like the topic which is alternative behaviors. Yeah. So about like people don't do things because it's habitual. So like consumer inertia, um, framing, all those things, right? Those are like that's like an A star topic that people ignore. And one of the issues with taxation is that people would still pay the tax because they're addicted to the good. So you need to get around that addiction. Maybe change how they see things. Yeah. Change society around them because some people smoke because of peer pressure. Or because, like I said earlier, their granddad and grandma still smoke and they're still going. Um, does that make sense? Yeah. And then I always say with macro, you usually what you want to do is talk about with macro, you want to say it says like the government wants to reduce inflation. You want to talk about a demand side policy and a supply side policy. And then basically that's going to be your two paragraphs. Because remember, inflation can be caused by demand side, demand pull inflation, or cost push. Yeah. And then your conclusion will just basically be, well, it depends on what's causing the inflation. And maybe the most effective way is to use both policies. Yeah.
I have a question about macro
Yep.
like essays. So I had a question about economic growth and like sources of economic growth. And in the extract, it talked about deregulation.
Hmm.
I spoke about like deregulation leading to lower costs of production,
Yeah.
but I don't know if like can you use micro because I feel like cost of production is more of a micro terminology. So can you use it
Well,
for macro?
you can because remember, cost of production is going to affect the SRAS.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you could use that. Um, so in here, there's also stuff about like the different types of questions that might get. Um, so this is evaluating multiple policies. So yeah, so when you're talking about multiple policies, you need to write three paragraphs about different policies. It's good to use two policies with a diagram. So um, let's say you want to increase growth. There's two ways to increase growth. We can use demand side policies or supply side policies. And supply side policies, there's two types of supply side policies. Yeah. We can use interventionist policies. So when the government decides to spend money on like education, healthcare, that's when they intervene. Or they can use market-based approaches. That's when they change the market. So like deregulation, like you give an example of. Yeah. Or if they reduce the immigration law, so you increase the supply of labor. Um, what else do I need to say?
Sorry, can you just repeat what you said for the intervention supply side policies? Like an
Yeah,
example of.
interventionist policies, supply side policies, is when the government basically changes a market. So they don't directly like spend money, leading to a supply side shift. Does that make sense? So if they said like they increased or they lowered the requirements to get a visa in the UK, that would obviously increase the quantity of labor, but they've not spent any money to shift LRAS.
Wait, so is that intervention supply side policies or market supply side policies?
Market.
And then what about for intervention?
Intervention is when they directly spend money. So
Okay.
they go and spend money on new schools and hospitals. Um, Also remember we've got two types of demand side policies as well. We got monetary fiscal. So you can do a paragraph on monetary, one on fiscal, then one on supply side, whichever way you want to do it. Any questions so far? Marissa, is this making sense as of yet?
Yeah, I just have a question about the
Yeah.
difference between monetary and fiscal policy.
Yes. Oh, what's the difference?
Yeah, like I get it, but I don't get it.
So monetary is going to be when the Bank of England changes the interest rate or the money supply. Yeah. And that one is so that's where we talk about the transmission mechanism, so how it affects savings and borrowing, the exchange rate, expectations, um, and so on. Whereas fiscal policy is when the government changes taxation or spending. Yeah. So that's the main difference. And then obviously in our evaluation, we're going to talk about like schools of thought. Our Keynesians are going to believe that monetary policy is the best, sorry, fiscal policy is the best way because we've got spare capacity. Because remember, the LRAS diagram is straight and then it curves up. So we've got the ability to generate growth without any inflation. Our Keynesian, sorry, that's our Keynesian, our monetarist believe that in the long run we're always at full capacity. So using aggregate demand side, so AD, so demand side policy, so like monetary and fiscal policy, just generates inflation. Yeah. So
Wait, did you say that when they're at full capacity, that fiscal and monetary policy just generates inflation?
yeah.
So then what do they use
So
then?
so that's when you need to have your supply side paragraph
Oh,
because in your
okay.
conclusion you're going to be like, if the economy is at full capacity in the Keynesian model, then it's better to use supply side policies because that's going to generate inflation, generate growth, because that's what's going to happen is this. Um, so if we're over here and we want the economy to grow, if we just shift LRAS, the economy grows and inflation falls. Yeah. And also it depends on the school of thought because if you're a monetarist economist, you believe this is what's happening in the economy. So if you shift AD, all it does is then generate inflation. So what you need to do is shift LRS. Yeah. Um. What's
I just have
so?
one more question.
Yes.
For Keynesian models, is it just LRAS or like do they also have SRAS models for Keynesian?
No, there's no SRS because they believe in the short run Well, they don't really believe in a short run. They just believe that the economy is basically shifting over
And that
time.
there's always like spare capacity.
Yes.
Okay.
Whereas the classical economists believe there is a short run and a long run.
Okay. Wait, so what's that long one for classical lists? Like
This
what's the model?
this one here, where the LRS is a straight line.
Oh, okay. And then SRAS is just the
That's their short run.
yeah, okay.
So this would be our Keynesian, and this is our classical. Right. So in the other bit of the other bit of the sheet is going to tell you about how to like apply your knowledge, how to analyze, and then also how you evaluate. So just in case you struggle with evaluating, there's elements of that, so that you know like things that you can easily talk about. I would say evaluation, like you get marks for like making a line, but if you got evidence to back it up, your evaluation's like bulletproof. So let's say, for example, um, time lag. We can say obviously there's a time lag with monetary policy. How long is that time lag? Why is there a time lag? So evidence shows that the transmission mechanism takes about 18 to 24 months to play out. And that's because people take time to change their saving and spending habits. Markets take time to adjust. People's expectations takes time to adjust. So do you see the difference? How I've just said a sentence and I've added stuff to it, even though it's not like, well, I mean, there's a fact in there which is 18 to 12 months, 24 months, but I've not given you like housing markets take, I don't know, 6 to 9 months to change about 3%. You don't need that level of detail. I mean, if you can get that, perfect, but as long as your applied knowledge is real and truthful, you're fine. So I think I showed this earlier on in the year 13 one. So I created it's kind of like a cheat sheet for your different like so this one's micro and it's just like facts and figures, right? So negative externalities, consumption, smoking, easy. So healthcare costs is 2.4 billion annually on smoking related diseases. Um, so stamp duty, so the duty on cigarettes is around 16% above inflation. So that's so if so whatever inflation is, it's always 16% more. Smoking rates have decreased by 13.3% um since well in by 2022. Um People have shifted towards vaping. So about 4.7 million people vape in the UK in 2023. So it's an expanding market. So maybe that's like evidence to basically talk about why you should not only tax cigarettes but tax all smoking products. Yeah. So these like stuff you can easily Google and find, and I just create like a heading for each one and find stuff that's relevant. And like I said the other week, like I can do all this stuff for you guys, but it sticks better if you find it because you remember doing it. Um, so I can send this in anyway, so people have got it, but it goes through so the back end of it won't be relevant to second year because it will be all the second year stuff. But if you just find all the bits that are relevant to you, then there you go. So any questions so far?
I just have a quick question about externalities because we haven't
Yeah.
learned it in school yet. For like negative externalities, so does that occur because of the overconsumption of demerit goods? Is like
So
that.
it depends, right? So if it's consumption, then it's going to be a demerit good. Yes, the good is being overconsumed, and being overproduced. If it's a negative production externality, that good is being overproduced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um. So yeah. Right. Any other questions?
I had a question about like, you know how you need to know about different countries and like information about them?
Hmm.
How much information do you actually need to know?
I just say like I pick a developed country, developing country, probably like two of each maybe, and then I'll find stuff like the GDP recently, their unemployment rate, inflation rate, any like any any recent policies or like really big policies and how they've translated into the economy. So, for example, if you found out that like, let me go with the UK. So the UK used um increased the interest rate to 5% during the cost of living crisis. Yeah, and one of the effects was that it helped inflation decrease from 11% to 3%. Right? So that's an example of like knowing a policy and how it's affected the economy, so that way you can use that analysis you can use that evidence in your analysis to kind of back up like I'm not chatting shit. This actually does happen. So just stuff like that, I would say.
Can the UK then be included in one of our countries, or should it be
Yeah,
like two other
no,
countries?
no, no. I would say UK, know as much as you can about the UK. Um, then I'd either do either Europe, America as your developed countries, and then your developing countries, I would say something like either Brazil, Vietnam, um, India, Nigeria, well, China's class is developed now, but they've got a load of like developing stuff that you could have talked about. So, I mean, when me and Alicia were doing our eco, we had an acronym called BRIC. That's the countries that we used to just have to remember. So Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Well, obviously, a lot's changed in what, 11 years. Makes me feel old. Um, right. Any other questions? Fizid, do you have a question before I go through an example essay?
Yeah, sorry. Hold on, I just found it.
Hmm.
Can you go over trade pollution permits? And so from the Edexcel spec, that's 4.1.4.1
Yeah. Um,
B.
yeah, I will talk about that after. Um, if you do want it explained fully, so obviously try and do it in as quick as a format as I can. On the recordings, I've gone through it twice.
Is that on the normal like Saturday lessons?
Yeah. So,
Okay. What would that be?
where?
Like what week?
What week? So, I'll share my screen and I can show you. So, if you put in pollution, it's week one, sorry, year one, week 11, and it was the 11th, the 15th of the 11th. Um, but also, it will be in one of these. Yeah, it'll be in that week. This one. Sorry, not this one. The one that I just said. Also, whilst I'm here, if you in here there is a lot of essay plans. So if you go to like the crash courses that Alicia did, she'll walk you through how you answer essays anyway as well, if you did want additional help. And like I said in the exam so if you did want it instead of like going through like reading the summaries, there's also those representations. Right. Okay. So I'll just show this model essay, and then we will talk about pollution permits. Where's it gone? Right. Did everyone see this? So here's an example, and the question was evaluate ways the government can control and regulate negative consumption externalities. And so again, define key. So this is kind of more of a plan, and some bits are actually written. So define key terms like negative consumption externalities, external cost, market failure, types of market failure and overconsumption, indirect taxes, subsidies, and provision of information. Then the next bit, you're telling the examiner what's to come. So this following essay will look at how governments can reduce negative consumption externalities from smoking through the use of indirect tax, information provision, and subsidies. And then you're answering the question. So a dual policy approach would effectively reduce smoking by a combination of taxation and direct disincentive as a direct disincentive and subsidies or information as a provision to be an indirect incentive. This may not discourage consumption, but also increases the process's demand over time, making the policy more effective in the long run. So what we're saying is, when we put these policies in place, people are going to be inelastic. The demand is going to be inelastic in the short run because some people, it's going to take them time to get, I don't know, over smoking. Yeah, or take some time to compute or understand how smoking affects them because they might need like a life-threatening disease that they have or a shock. And they're like, okay, maybe I should stop smoking. And over time, their demand for smoking will become elastic. Yeah. So next one. So this paragraph. So this is something that I would say is a good idea. Is you can do a paragraph to set the scene. So basically, talk about the negative externality itself. So here is in the free market, a negative consumption externality is when the MPB is obviously greater than the MSB. So in the free market, consumers overconsume, which has a negative consumption externality. So in my application, it costs society 10 billion a year due to the overconsumption of cigarettes. It costs the NHS nearly 2.5 billion every year because people overestimate the benefits of consuming a good with negative externalities and don't consider the social benefit. So people who are consuming cigarettes, their private benefit is they believe, oh, it helps me de-stress. It gives me something to do socially, lets me like hang out with my mates, blah blah. Those benefits aren't greater than the social effect it has, right? So as we can see here, this means that market failure occurs as is inefficient allocation of resources because we're over producing this good. Yeah. So I thought it was going now, but it's so the next paragraph is going to be my first policy. So my first policy is a tax. So the tax will shift MSC to the left. What I would say is if you want, you can draw a demand curve here, and that's going to be your MSB. And the reason I draw that is I would say even though they've not shifted demand, the quantity that they would have here, Q star, is the social optimal quantity. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it would mean that we've reduced smoking to the social optimal level. And then the reason I've done that is because what you're going to argue is in your evaluation, what if you overtax and you shift supply over here? Well, quantity is going to be somewhere over here. You've taxed more than you should have. Yeah. Or if supply is over here, you've undertaxed. Yeah. So that's a valuation that you can use.
Why is it bad to overtax it? Because isn't our aim to reduce quantity as much as possible?
That so that comes in. So that's a very good point. So then that's where you're thinking about, are you wanting to be a government that does allow freedom or does? So there's a fairness element to that. So it's a very good point. So basically, if you overtax, it's good because you're stopping people from doing it, but then you're not allowing people free will, and that's a problem. So that's a bit in evaluation that you can say. So any questions so far? So if we now look at our plan here, so we're going to talk about an indirect tax. So what we would have done is we saying the indirect tax, the consumer will have a larger part of the tax because they're inelastically demanded. So this will obviously lead to the price. We talked about the shifts. The shift is going to be that supply shifts to the left, price will increase, and we've talked about who's paying more of the tax. Yeah, quantity will fall. We've talked about that. Our equilibrium will be that there's been a contraction in demand because the price is higher. So this will help reduce the NHS and wider costs by about 12.6 billion. Right, that's a bit of valuation. And additionally, the tax revenue collected can be hypothecated, so it can be used to reduce further externalities. So that money can be used to fix what the NHS was having to fork out. Yeah. My evaluation in the short run, price elasticity demand for these goods is inelastic because it's addictive. This means that consumption will only decrease minimally after the tax. So we can say here, look, so this is like after a 9.7%. Oh, I don't think you. Sorry. There we go. After 9.7% tax increase, 48% of consumers decreased consumption or it altered. So you could argue demand is not inelastic over time. And that's because they just pivoted to vapes. Yeah. So in our conclusion, we might say maybe we need to tax not only cigarettes and vapes as well. Yeah. So this is a good point. This is a good example of the first bit here that's in green. That's going to be your point. That's your evaluation. The simple part of the evaluation. The bit in red is the evidence to back up what you're saying. Yeah. Then you can say here substitutes for cigarettes have been created, such as e-cigarettes and vapes in recent years. Vapes have become popular, especially amongst younger generations, with people at the age of even 11 like consuming vapes. Additionally, 20% of children have tried vaping in 2023. Brands like Elf bars have grown in market share of 70%, and this shows that the unintended consequence of the tax could mean government failure because the government's negative externalities have increased because people are switching to using e-cigarettes and vapes, which is a negative externality as well. Does this make sense? Any questions? No? So next part is about going to be information provision. Yeah. So what we could do is we could just provide information. in theory, if we provided information, the demand would just shift to the left. You could draw that diagram if you wanted to. Yeah. Because you discourage people. Because it's in a way the information could be provided through advertisement. Like we have adverts on TV about smoking is bad, YouTube, and all sorts, right? And then you would talk about all of that, but and then you would analyze that fully. So you could say like the government could fund that information provision using that tax that we talked about earlier on. My evaluation for that would be that, well, some people might not understand the information. If you told someone like cigarettes negatively impact your lung capacity, someone might be like, what does that mean? Right? So they don't really understand that information. Um so and then the example here that was given was like the public are not very good at understanding information. So for example, McDonald's created a third quarter pounder burger, right? Which was, and people thought that a quarter pounder was bigger than a third of a quarter pounder burger. Yeah. Same with like how they get you. Anyone ever go to Superdrug and it's like four for free, and you get tempted and you end up buying four things instead of three, and then you go to the till and you end up like, oh, that's a bit expensive, and it's because on the T's and C's it says you get the cheapest one free. So you've ended up spending more money than you have, and it's because you can't make that quick calculation in your head. It's the same as like uh so on a display with like stuff on sale, you know how sometimes it says like up to 40% off. You go there, you pick up what you want, and you go to the till, and then you get some discount, but because you couldn't work out 40%, you've just gone, oh, that's fine. And you worked out when you got home that it was only 10%. Well, the marketing regulations say only like 20% of the items on that display have to be at 40%. The rest can just be less than that. And you can have that sign. Because the wording says up to. Some people just read 40%. Because usually the 40% is in massive and then up to is like in tiny. So information can be skewed. People who usually consume these goods are more likely to be people from low income households, yeah. So they might not have access to information. So your poorer people might not have access to a library to research about smoking. People are low income households likely to be less educated, so they can't understand the information. So studies actually show that there is a positive correlation between income and health outcomes, because if you've got high income, you're typically well educated, and because you're well educated, you understand about your body and health, so you look after yourself better. Regional disparities: low income households don't have equal access to healthcare due to lack of funding in those areas. That's another issue. And then our next paragraph, our fourth one, is going to be about subsidizing. So what we could do is subsidizing ways to stop smoking. Or you could have done regulation, whichever one you wanted to do. Subsidizing things like Nicorettes and stuff like that. So you would talk about that, the subsidy would shift to the right. Because the good is inelastic, what's going to happen if we have a subsidy and the good is inelastically demanded?
Quantity won't fall that much or increase
Yep.
that much.
What's going to happen to the price?
It will like change significantly.
Yeah, that's the benefit. That's what we want. We want it to be as cheap as possible for people to potentially substitute. And like over time, demand becomes more elastic. Perfect. Something's cheaper over time and demands become more elastic, more people are going to consume it. Yeah. Then with our conclusion, to answer the question, well, we need a combination of all policies to be beneficial. What's the most important factor? the government intervention, government information, because they need to understand. Because with government information, they understand what to set the tax at, how much to subsidize, how to perfectly distribute the information, what the price elasticity of demand is, and how, and potentially what the cross elasticity of demand between smoking and vaping. Yeah, because if vaping and smoking are close substitutes, then if you increase the price of cigarettes, people will switch to vaping. If they're not so close substitutes, then that might not happen. You might not need to think about vaping. Any questions? And then obviously what it depends upon. In the short run, the taxes will be ineffective. But because demand is inelastic, it means that they generate a lot of revenue. And also depends on the government intervention. It won't guarantee the change in consumption. But yeah, any questions? Fizzer, any questions?
No.
All right. Sorry I didn't get to go through your point, but if you watch that video first, and if it still doesn't make sense, then just send me a message and then I'll explain it. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
no problem. Right. Any other questions?